Welcome to episode 57 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with our special Mobile World Congress 2021 wrap-up. So my first topic is focused on AT&T. They announced with Azure for operators that AT&T will be moving its 5G mobile network into the Azure cloud. Now, the question is this a wise move? I was actually pre-briefed ahead of this announcement and spent time with executives at both AT&T and Azure. And from my perspective, it's a smart move. AT&T, in my mind, has really led the operator charge with respect to investing in software-defined networking tools. They've been doing that for about 5 years now. And it's no secret as they get, kind of refocused on what they're best at, the latest spinoff of Warner Media, and now moving, basically their network functions into the cloud. I think this is a good thing. I mean, certainly, Azure has, the win in its sales. They're doing a lot within the telco space from a cloud perspective. And what I also like about this transaction is that AT&T will actually be transferring IP that it developed over the last 5 years to Azure, and Azure will use that and leverage that and share that with operators globally that take advantage of its services. So from my perspective, it's a win-win. It's going to provide needed scale and competency for AT&T to really sort of scale out. As we've talked about Dish on prior podcasts, they're also focused on deploying, a cloudified 5G mobile network. And so from my perspective, this is a good thing. What are your thoughts?
I think I agree with pretty much everything that you said. I would also add that I think it's interesting that AT&T would allow, not maybe now, but enable Microsoft to share a lot of their IP with other operators, just because AT&T is a global operation. They have businesses in Mexico as well as in the US. But I think it's a positive thing, right? Like AT&T, they need to have a partner who understands their network, and they have a very complicated network because they have lots of backhaul. They have a very large tier 1 network, and they're doing lots of new and interesting things in addition to 5G, including expanding their fiber network. And I think as they continue to broaden the bandwidth that they're enabling in all different types of connectivity, they're going to need a partner who can keep up with them and has the right infrastructure. And it seems like they're going very deep with Microsoft on Azure.
Yeah, they definitely are. I actually got some, inquiries from journalists, and they were asking, does this mean that AT&T is giving up the management of its mobile network? Absolutely not. This will be hosted on, the Azure platform, but AT&T will still manage and operate the network. So, and again, it's leveraging core competencies that AT&T, recognizes. That can really kind of grow the capability and the quality of service longer term. So we will definitely keep our eyes posted on this one and report back on future podcasts. Let's move to your first topic this week with respect to Mobile World Congress. And there were some announcements on 5G chipsets, and I know a new DPU family with Marvell, and you want to spend some time there and talk about those.
Yeah, so I'm specifically kind of focusing on chipsets for this part of the podcast. There weren't as many 5G chipset announcements as we've seen in previous years. A lot of them have been modem announcements or RF front end announcements.
Sure.
And we covered some last week that kind of led up to MWC. But this week was very heavy from Qualcomm specifically. They announced a new Snapdragon 888 Plus, which is an improved version of the Snapdragon 888, which is already shipping in most Android's flagships today. The difference is it has a faster CPU and about double the AI performance. So they've really improved the performance of the 888 in a way that matches what's needed from the market. And I expect that you'll see phones from it very soon, definitely available before the end of the year. And then in addition to that, Qualcomm also announced a second generation of their 5G RAN small cell platform, which is the FSM 200XX. I assume the XX is for, adding new numbers as there's different SKUs. What's interesting about that product is it enables up to 8 gigabits per second on millimeter wave as a small cell, which is impeccable, and 4 gigabits per second on sub 6. So the sub 6 is 200 megahertz of spectrum. But this is going to be a very powerful solution. It adds support for 41 gigahertz, which is band N259, and it adds supports for 26 gigahertz, which is band N258. So it's adding support for new bands that are like not even in use yet. So it's a very future-looking platform, and it's very comprehensive, and it also supports 3GPP release 16. So it's just jam-packed with features. I think this is going to be a very popular platform for the infrastructure vendors to deploy 5G in places where, they're space and power constrained. And this is going to be, probably the go-to solution for a lot of companies.
I agree. Qualcomm is taking that infrastructure play to the next level on the small cell space. And they had a big announcement at their 5G summit. And this is just more wind in their sails as they're really, from my perspective, they're really owning that small cell market.
And then the ARM Octeon announcement is a lot more, also kind of a RAN focused announcement. It's their Octeon 10, which is a DPU. But what's interesting is it's using the latest generation of ARM's Neoverse CPUs. I believe it's the N2. And that's just interesting because it has so many networking capabilities, lots of bandwidth, so much processing, AI capabilities. It's just jam-packed with features and capabilities that I think a lot of their partners are going to be interested in implementing in their network infrastructure equipment.
Yeah, I wrote a Forbes article about this, sort of analyzing the announcement, and the features are impressive. VPP, which is a new form of packet processing that integrates AI and ML, a 1 terabit switch. And also, the company claims that that platform can reduce power substantially by over 50%. So this family continues to mature and provide, it just seems like quantum levels of performance with new iterations. And so Marvell, just like Qualcomm, they're, from my perspective, they're sort of neck and neck and really sort of driving the 5G silicon front. But let's move to my second topic this week. And Ericsson and Google Cloud Platform announced a partnership for edge enablement. And my question is, can this help accelerate Google from laggard to leader? And I don't think necessarily this one announcement will do that. But on prior podcasts, I have spoken to the fact that from my perspective, AWS has been in the pole position. They've been in the lead position with respect to cloudification and bringing edge enablement to these mobile network operators. You can look at tie-ups with Verizon and AWS to that degree. And then Azure has been a strong second, coming on very quickly with key acquisitions and those sorts of things. And we talked about the Azure AT&T lockup. This is going to provide Azure, I think, more momentum. And so, Google, with their Anthos platform, they've sort of been, kind of waiting in the wings. And so I think this might be the first step in the right direction for them. Kevin Schatzkammer is the general manager or VP that manages their telco business. He's a former Dell executive. I know Kevin, and I had actually reached out to him, and he said, stay tuned, that you're going to be hearing more about GCP and their push into telco. But I think this is a positive step forward for Google, and certainly partnering with Ericsson, in my mind, is the right move. I don't know if you have any additional insights there, buddy, but go ahead.
I do think that Google is definitely a laggard, and I don't think this one announcement will necessarily, make them leapfrog all of the things that they've been behind on.
Sure.
But I do think that Google is starting to understand 5G better. I think that they, as a company, didn't really prioritize it either on the infrastructure side nor on the consumer device side until fairly recently. And I think now that there's someone at Google who is pushing 5G more aggressively, I think we're seeing a more aggressive push towards enabling 5G both on the infrastructure side and on the client side. So, Android as an OS now on 11 has unique 5G specific features. So I think that we're just seeing Google as a company maturing in its understanding of 5G. And for a company of their size, I think that they can definitely catch up more easily than, say, a smaller competitor that doesn't have the scale Google does.
I agree. Yeah, and the resources as well. I mean, when Google puts its weight into something, they usually, they do it with aplomb. But let's move to your second topic, and I want to comment on this one. But I saw Elon Musk. I think he dialed in to Mobile World Congress. Maybe from Starbase Moon Unit or wherever in Texas. And I was pleased. I tweeted it out and said I was pleased to see Elon commenting on something other than cryptocurrency and Dogecoin, right? But he was speaking about Starlink, and you had some information that you wanted to share about that.
Yeah, so the reality is that Starlink is an internet connectivity company. They offer internet service through satellite in a way that's shown to be faster and lower latency than any other solution to date. And there have been questions about what kinds of bandwidth can be sustainable as the company grows.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that were talked about was, first of all, Elon came out straight out and said he doesn't see Starlink as a competitor to 5G and fiber, but as a complementary solution, which I think is a much more mature statement than I think what we've seen maybe in the past. Sometimes Elon gets caught up in his
overpromise.
Well, I think he just gets caught up in like what he's talking about and kind of doesn't necessarily focus on the reality of the situation. But clearly he's made a slight course correction and I think my view has always been that Starlink and any kind of satellite technology will be complementary to 5G and fiber and fill in the holes where fiber and 5G simply cannot scale, right? And I think there's a lot of people out there that would benefit from that. That said, they currently only have 69,000 customers in the world in about a dozen countries, and they're paying about $100 a month for their high-speed internet, which is not great, but it's also not horrible. And the problem is the terminals are very expensive, which is something that they're working on reducing the cost of. And they already have 1,500 satellites in orbit, and they're planning on launching many, many more. And they said that they plan on investing somewhere between $5 and $10 billion to continue to grow the constellation. But what's interesting is that there were statements about the fact that Starlink, will need to gain customers and revenue to remain sustainable. And that might come to the tune of a $30 billion a year business to maintain the cost of satellites and bandwidth. But what's interesting is, the claim is that 500,000 customers might be served by this, but I think the reality is something like Starlink would need to serve millions of customers or tens of millions of customers if it's going to be a truly global solution and to fill in the gaps in places where it's needed. And I think that Starlink cannot be the only company to do this for it to truly be a solution for people in the fringes of internet connectivity.
Yeah, OneWeb, certainly they've emerged out of bankruptcy with Hughes, and there was actually an announcement at Mobile World Congress on something that they're doing, like a proof of concept and that sort of thing. And I think you researched what it's like. Elon believes that LEO can contribute 3 to 5%, of the needed sort of connectivity. So I agree with you. It's sort of a gap fill, but it's certainly no argument for me, and I've been on public record stating this and Forbes articles and tweets and blogs and whatnot, that low Earth orbit satellite will definitely be an element, part of bridging the digital divide. And I also wonder, I don't have any information on this, but I also wonder if Elon has sought with SpaceX and Tesla government subsidies to the tune, of hundreds of millions of dollars. And I wonder, these big infrastructure packages that are being kicked around Capitol Hill, if he isn't, has his designs on, getting some additional funding to sort of subsidize what he's doing here. Because, yeah, you're right. I mean, to scale that business and to make it, sustainable long term, you're going to need more than a few 100,000 customers to make it a reality. So, but we'll definitely keep tabs on this. And let's move to my third and final topic this week at Mobile World Congress. And it was at the beginning of the event. Telefonica came out and they were speaking pretty harshly about the EU and the European Commission with respect to outdated regulations. And so, are they on the mark? And I got to say, yeah, they are. There's no question that Europe has lagged other parts of the world with respect to 5G deployment. A lot of that is complications related to individual countries, managing spectrum auctions and that sort of thing. But in general, as you kind of dig into it, the regulations are pretty outdated. Call them old school, call them what you will. And so I applauded Telefonica. They came out, I think it was on the first day, and they really kind of threw a dart at the subject. And and their operators, other operators in Europe like Deutsche Telekom, that have been very vocal about individual country spectrum auctions and the escalation and raising revenue. And you and I have talked about that on prior podcasts, in particular as it related to the C-band auction. So I think there needs to be better governance of just the overall spectrum auction, and then just in general a revisit of regulations in Europe. So I don't know if you caught this news at the show this week, but did you have any insights?
I did not actually. I think that one slipped under the radar for me, but I know that when you look at the European framework for carriers and regulation, it's definitely focused more on enabling access and cost controls for consumers rather than focus on innovation.
Right.
And I do think that with 5G, we are seeing some rejiggering of that regulation to enable innovation and rapid growth. But I do think that you're right, that there needs to be a rethinking of things. But that said, I also think that there's an inherent difference in the way the European market works compared to, say, the US or China, where you have, dozens of member states who have different goals, and they have different understandings of what a mobile network operator needs to deliver, what internet services need to do, because in Europe, they may not have 5G to the point where we have today in the US, but they also pay half of what we pay for essentially the same amount of bandwidth or even faster speeds. So there's some give and take there. And I think that the Europeans just have a different way of approaching things. And I think that I think that kind of inherently puts them in a position where they might not always be the leaders in something, but I think it also positions them maybe in the long term to still have a more consumer friendly framework than maybe what we have in the US and in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, you made a very astute comment. The focus has been on access. And when you look at, all of the hoo-ha that went around, roaming within the EU, right? And all of that. And then you look at rate plan pricing vis-a-vis what you see, for example, in comparison in the US. And it's like, I was just talking to someone who's based in Greece last week, and yeah, I mean, for a similar plan, he's paying half the euros than I am, in dollars. And so it's definitely been more of a focus on access, and especially when you think about like Wi-Fi as well, and what EU has done, to provide free Wi-Fi access, versus monetizing Wi-Fi. So I think as they start thinking about the regulations, they start thinking beyond access, and they start thinking about all the transformative applications and use cases that are going to come out of 5G. Maybe that'll change, and that'll start with the European Commission, because they're the ones that are really sort of focused on all of that. But great insight. I'm glad you brought up the access piece. But let's move to your third and final topic this week. And actually, Deutsche Telekom is a great segue, because you want to talk about DT and Ericsson with a 5G demo.
Yeah, so there were actually two big announcements that happened in XR and 5G at MWC. Just because I'm like our XR guy, I wanted to pull those in. One is a Deutsche Telekom and Ericsson 5G network slicing demonstration, and the other one is NVIDIA's CloudXR 3.0. So when you look at these announcements, they kind of demonstrate how closely connected 5G and XR are together. We've seen them talked about a lot across the industry for multiple years, but it hasn't really come down to anything of significant like meat yet. We're kind of getting in the early phases, and I think one of the big use cases for 5G network slicing is XR, and I think a lot of people have talked about it. But now Deutsche Telekom is working with Ericsson and Samsung in a lab trial to basically test a Galaxy S21 tethered VR headset, and then work with Ericsson on their 5G infrastructure to have a specific network slice for VR to enable dedicated services and capabilities for VR, which will also work for AR. They're essentially they operate the same, and they're both very low latency. And what it did is it kind of looked at the different capabilities for 5G end-to-end network slicing that would maintain latency, which is super important if you want to do edge compute VR, where it's called split rendering, where you render some on the cloud and you render some on the headset, and you need to have a very reliable latency and compute capabilities to make that happen. And that's why I haven't really talked about it much on the podcast, because I didn't think it was really a viable solution until we had network slicing. And this is a big step in that direction, because it actually starts working out all the different types of problems you might have in trying to do a network sliced VR application. And that is a big deal, because Ericsson's one of the big 5G RAN vendors.
Yeah.
And it actually kind of tees up for my second topic, which is NVIDIA's CloudXR 3.0, which is kind of the infrastructure end of that in terms of compute. And what NVIDIA does is they first of all, they make the GPUs and the CPUs that can run in the cloud and do this really high performance rendering, and then send it out to an AR or VR headset in the 5G network. So they've started adding more features to their CloudXR platform, which utilizes their ray tracing capabilities, but also is adding stuff like iOS client improvements. So you can have a 5G phone and be looking at a fully rendered automobile that's rendering in the cloud. Those kinds of things would be impossible without CloudXR and having the right latencies built into the 5G network. So they're adding asynchronous connection support, so that way clients are maybe still connected consistently when they're establishing a connection to the server. And they added some bidirectional audio, so that way you can use it for more than just a one-way connection. You can actually use it for an actual interaction with other users in the cloud. And then they're also adding tons of API changes and bug fixes. And they also have the Wave VR client for improving color and gamma handling. So this is very professional focused. But I think all these professional improvements in CloudXR are going to be what drive the consumer capabilities down the road, where you have an AR headset, you're walking down the street, and things are just streaming to your headset from the cloud. And your headset doesn't need to be a gigantic helmet. It can just be a nice, sleek pair of 5G glasses.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of compute power, right? When you're connected to the cloud. So, well, hey, we went over a little bit, but we had a lot of great stuff to talk about with respect to Mobile World Congress this week. But why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like us to provide specific topic on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend and please tune in again next week.